Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to welcome to Thursday, July 16th. Week 10 here in Vancouver. It's kind of cloudy. I think it might get sunny later though, so that's okay. Hope everyone had a good day yesterday. Hope everyone got outside because it was really warm and sunny and nice. Um, let's see who's here. Benamir is here. Good morning, Benamir. Casey is here. Good morning, Casey. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Mashid. Good morning, Jimmy. Good morning. Good evening, Tika. Duong, good morning to you. Chan, good morning. Erica's here. Hello, Erica. And Jenna's here. Morning, Jenna. Um, so, just as a quick recap of what we talked about yesterday. Just a little recap of what we talked about yesterday. We said that we're going to have our fourth quiz on Monday, and it will be on most of the sexism stuff that we've been talking about. I'm going to put the range of classes into Microsoft Teams so that we can just confirm what the window is, so what you'll need to study. So we'll do that Monday. We also agreed yesterday that we wouldn't do the third micropaper because we don't really have time. And so I agreed to, over the next few days, mark the micropaper that you've just handed in, the second one, get it back to you really quick, and then on Tuesday I will assign the sort of final paper. And the final paper will take the place of the final exam for this class, so there'll be no final exam. And we will, I think we'll have the due date for that one be the last day of class, August the 7th. So that way you hand it in to me on the last day of class, and then you're free and clear, and you can just deal with your other exams the week after. So I think that's what we decided. Okay, that's good. Let's hop in. Okay. So, yesterday we were talking a little bit about we were moving toward exploring some of the maybe cultural or historical reasons for inequalities between men and women. And of course, every culture is going to be different. What is interesting is that we see in pretty much every culture around the world, we see an inequality between men and women. Men tend to have more power and opportunity and resources. Women tend to have less. Depending on where you go, where you are in the world, sometimes that inequality is quite significant. Sometimes that inequality is a little bit smaller. But everywhere in the world, women experience inequality. They are in a minoritized group. And again, it's worthy of pointing out here that being in a minoritized group isn't about being in a minority. On average, women make up half the population, in some cases more. Here in Canada, I think it is 52% women and 48% men. So, ladies, you are in the majority here in Canada, but you are still a minoritized group because it's men who have the power. So, power isn't really about numbers necessarily, it's about who controls social institutions and legal institutions and so on. So we said that we were talking about how sexuality is sort of perceived and controlled. And so we talked a little bit about pop music videos, particularly Ariana Grande's video. And we said that there are, in the West anyway, here in the West, there are general ideas about what men are supposed to be like, sort of dominant, somewhat aggressive, or at least assertive, sort of the one in control, and to be promiscuous, to have lots of sexual relationships with women, or at least that's rewarded, that's encouraged. But women, on the other hand, are expected to be kind of the opposite. They're expected to be submissive, to allow themselves to be pursued. Good morning, Caleb. But at the same time, there is a lot of value, and hello, Ivan. There's a lot of value put on women's sexual purity, right? And so we said that, you know, for a guy who sort of is very successful with women, we have lots of names and labels for him, but for the most part, they are positive, right? They make him cooler. But for women, women behaving in the same way have lots of negative labels attached to them, right? And um, so I was trying to make the case yesterday that men often have fewer controls on their sexuality, or at least if they break the rules, the punishments are less severe. Whereas for women, there are more controls, or those controls are more strict, and there's more serious punishments if they break the rules. And one of the reasons for that double standard might go back all the way to the founding of agriculture, when humans first started to grow their own food about 10,000 years ago. Um, we watched a TED Talk by Christopher Ryan. Christopher Ryan said that um, this earlier version of human sexuality, this earlier understanding of human sexuality, where men exchanged food and protection and shelter for a woman's sexual fidelity, or sort of reproductive rights, if you will. Um, that was an idea that was in vogue for a long time, and you'll still hear it. You'll still hear people reference this type of idea. But Christopher Ryan argues that based on what we know about hunter-gatherers in anthropology, that's not the way things go. Usually foragers share everything, right? And so you don't need, if you're a woman living in a hunter-gatherer or a forager group, you don't really need to find a man to be fed or protected, because the hunter-gatherer group as a whole shares food with itself and protects itself as well. You don't need a man to do that. And so that earlier version of sexuality is probably not accurate. So he says that in the past, and so we're thinking about 10,000 years ago or earlier, although not in all places, but our foraging ancestors probably had multiple sexual relationships going on at one time. And so for human beings, Christopher Ryan says, sexuality is a means to create and maintain social relationships, a means to create and maintain social relationships first, and really only second is it a way for us to reproduce. And so for humans, sexuality and sexual intercourse is a bonding device. It's a social activity. It's not just to make more humans. At least that's what Christopher Ryan says anyway. He also made a statement about men monitoring and controlling women's sexual behavior, and their sexuality becoming conflated or attached to property rights. And we discussed the idea that what he was saying was that for agriculturalists, for farmers thousands of years ago, they inherited their land and their wealth through the father's line. This is a patrilineal system, if you will. And because inheritance came from the father's line, people wanted to make sure that the son of a farmer, for instance, was actually his son and wasn't the son of some other man. And so thousands of years ago, the only way to be absolutely sure was to control the sexuality of everybody, but particularly to control the sexuality of women. And so women's sexuality becomes much more tightly controlled in these types of societies in order to ensure the inheritance system and the system of wealth transfer through generations continues to operate properly. And so as time goes on in many societies, women actually become the property of men. They are in some ways owned by men, or in some ways kind of men are responsible for them. Men are responsible for their behavior. Men are required or encouraged to monitor these women's behavior and make sure that they follow the rules. And so these things kind of occur over time. And again, they come out of usually they come out of an agricultural context. They come out of a time in history where people farmed. And kind of the idea we're talking about here is an ideology called patriarchy. And so that comes from two Greek words, patris for father and archon for ruler. And so patriarchy is sort of the father or the man as the ruler. And so patriarchy, of course, believes that men are superior and that men should be in charge of organizing society. And in many cases, we see that, right? Many of us who come from a Judeo-Christian religious background, we imagine God to be a man, right? God is depicted as a man. We see fathers as heads of household. We see men as authority figures in business and in government, in law, and we see women as kind of subordinate to those ideas, right? Yeah. So what I was saying here is that one of the reasons that women experience inequality with men has to do with agriculture, has to do with what happened thousands of years ago and people transitioning from a hunting and gathering way of life to an agricultural, to a farming way of life. And so there's a number of other reasons there, but it's not an anthropology course, so maybe we won't go too deep into it. But maybe for now, it'll be enough to say that it's very strongly linked to wealth transfer. And so women's sexual behavior becomes very tightly controlled in order to make sure that a man's son is actually his. And so in that way, he can pass down his land and his wealth to his child. In hunter-gatherer groups, nobody cares about that. Nobody owns anything. There's nothing to pass down. If this kid is yours or isn't yours, doesn't make much of a difference. So it's really something that comes out of agriculture. But the one thing I'll say too is that sometimes culture takes a while to change, right? Deeply held ideas take a while to change. And so even here in the West, where we're not really an agricultural society, we're kind of a post-industrial, information society or whatever you want to call us. Even though we're not an agricultural society anymore, those ideas still persist. And so we still have an inequality between men and women. We still have a double standard in terms of what type of sexual behavior is acceptable for men and encouraged for men, and what type of sexual behavior is allowable for women, right? There's still an inequality, even though our society has kind of continued to evolve and continued to change. Those ideas are still hanging around, right? Okay, so yesterday we started watching this documentary. It's a BBC documentary called What Stands in the Way of Women Being Equal to Men. And so I had a few questions here that I asked you. I posted those in Student Portal yesterday. And so what I would like us to do now is to return to that video and watch the rest of it. And so I think, if I remember yesterday, we watched the first 15 minutes of it. And so that means there is, how much is there left here? There's about 20 minutes left. So what I'll do then is I'll turn you loose to watch the rest of that video, the last 20 minutes or so, then take a break, and then come back and we'll talk about what we've seen. And so if you recall, there are 4 young women who are talking about their experiences as young women in the societies that they live in. We've got Lulu from the UK, we've got Vigdis from Iceland, we've got Shway from Lesotho, and we have Mira from Jordan. And so all of these young women I'm guessing 15, 16, 17 years old, I think 15 and 16 actually, are talking about how they perceive life as a woman in their societies. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we've got about 20 minutes left. We'll take a 10-minute break after that one's done. So that'll give us 30 minutes. So we'll meet back here at 8:55. And then we'll start talking about some of these questions. And then I have something else for you to do. But I'll let you go back to Microsoft Teams, watch the last part of the video. We watched the first 15 minutes yesterday, so watch the rest of it today. Answer the questions as best you can, and I'll see you back here at 8:55. Okay? Okay, people, and we're back. So, this is my question for you. Do you want to try and have a conversation about this in YouTube, or do you want to hop over to Microsoft Teams? We can open up sort of a group chat and we can talk about it verbally, which might be easier. What do you think? What do you want to do? Because there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot to discuss, but it might be it might be pretty difficult to do it in this context here. So I'm thinking maybe the Teams chat would be better. But what do you think? Casey wants to stay in YouTube. Ika wants to stay in YouTube. Okay. John wants to stay in YouTube. All of you are still in bed, aren't you? You're still lying there with your phone over your head? Hmm? I'm teasing. Hmm. Karen, mine too. Aw. See, it's another way in which men and women are unequal, right? Because I don't have to worry about my hair and you have to worry about yours, right? It's not fair. It's not fair. Okay. Let's talk about this here then. Okay. So we hear a bunch of messages, all kinds of messages about boys and girls and what they should be like and the experiences that they have and what's expected of them and what's kind of allowed and what's not allowed. Give me what you got. There's tons and tons of stuff that we could talk about here because we've got 4 different young women. They're all living in 4 different cultures. Some of them are experiencing similar things, some of them are experiencing different things. There's all kinds of things we could talk about. So, what do you got? What do you got for me? Okay, so Casey says this. She says, right, so, um, yeah, okay, so women are expected to have a good reputation and play their role because that is what society is used to. That is definitely true. I think it was Mira who was talking about, or Mira's father, Marwan, who was talking about the good reputation thing. And I think that's true. I think that's true. To some degree, that's kind of expected of men as well, right? Men are kind of required to have a good reputation as well, although how you get to that reputation is different, right? So a woman with a good reputation means that she does or doesn't do certain things, and of course, men to have a good reputation, they do or don't do certain things as well. So I think that's very true. I think it works for men and women, but of course, what gives you a good reputation varies, right? But yes. Um, Casey also says women are expected to act cute and soft, and that men should take care of them. Um, yeah, we often see that, right? Is that men are part of the gender role of men is to be the strong protector, right? That's what we are socialized to be, and women are socialized to sort of be protected and right and to be soft and to be cute, to allow us men to protect you, right? Those are um, some aspects of the socialization that probably is somewhat common to many countries, I would say. Um, yeah, I think that's true, Casey. Karen says men have to be men have to be stronger and richer than girls, right? So Shui Shui in Lesotho, she's talking to um, some boys at her school, it looks like, and they're talking about, when you sort of grow up and get married, what happens if your wife makes more money than you, right? And so um, that's a tricky one for those boys, right? Because again, they have been socialized to see themselves as providers and protectors, right? That's what they're expected to be. And so the idea that their wife might actually make more money than them, what does that make them, right? If they're not the provider anymore, if they're not providing for their wife and family, then who are they, right? Because they've been socialized to feel that this is what a real man is, right? A real man takes care of his family and provides for his family. But again, if his wife were to make more than him, that's kind of threatening to that socialization, right? So you can see those guys that Shui Shui is talking to, and they're like, oh no, I couldn't have that, I couldn't do that, right? Because they are socialized to believe that they have to be a certain way, right? Karen's also got men's sexuality is not controlled. Um, it's true. It's true, right? Men have much fewer controls on their sexuality, in part because they are expected to be the pursuer, right? They're expected to be the initiator, right? So the men are expected to be the ones that are always kind of pursuing sexual behavior, and women are the ones who are supposed to say yes or no, right? And we see that kind of pattern in many cultures around the world. But as we can see, it puts a lot of pressure on women. That socialization of men as the pursuer and women as the pursued, and women who have to say yes or no. That puts a lot of pressure on women, and we see that with Shui Shui and her mother when they're having that very uncomfortable sex talk with the camera pointed at them. Ugh, so uncomfortable. But she's having that talk with her daughter Shui Shui, and she's talking about, she's talking about sex. She's talking about pregnancy. She's talking about the dangers of HIV. She's kind of warning her daughter that men are going to kind of push for sexual activity, and you're going to have to be strong enough to say no. And that's a very common talk that mothers have with their daughters all around the world. And again, it makes women responsible for men's behavior and men's sexuality, right? So men are always pushing for sexual activity. Women are the ones who have to resist it, right? And have to say no. And so again, it puts all of the responsibility on girls and women to regulate sexual activity, right? And that's a lot of pressure. And again, boys or young men don't often get the same talk, right? And so Shui Shui gets the talk where you have to be strong enough to say no to some of these boys, but the boys are probably not getting the same talk saying, look, don't push and pressure girls into sexual activity with you. That's not cool. Usually the guys don't get that talk, but the girls always get their talk, right? So women should not dishonor the family name. Dishonor the family name. Oh yeah, sorry, I see that, Karen. Yeah, women should not dishonor the family name. Yeah. So bad behavior by women in some cultures can bring dishonor to a family. That's very, very true. And women have to take care of children. Yeah, we see that too, is that women are expected to be the caretakers of children. And again, that's probably a cross-cultural universal to some degree. Obviously women give birth to children, and so they are the sort of obvious natural caregivers. Does that mean that men can't care for them as well? Probably not, right? But most of child care duties pretty much cross-culturally fall on women, right? And so depending depending on what culture you go to, sometimes men have just a little role in childcare. Sometimes in some cultures they have an almost equal role, but it kind of depends where you go. But women are usually the ones who are expected to take care of children. Give me more, guys. There's lots more. Come on. Why can't women have the same opportunities that men have? Yeah. And this is a bit of a tricky question, right? Because equality is easy to achieve when everyone is the same, okay? But when people are different, equality becomes more tricky to achieve, right? And so I think it's an uncontroversial statement to say that women are biologically different from men, right? The fact that women give birth to babies and men don't is kind of a very obvious but very clear suggestion that men and women actually are to some degree different. We're overwhelmingly the same. I mean, we're not different animals. We're overwhelmingly the same, but there are differences between us. And so that's what part of what makes attaining equality so difficult, is that we are a little bit different. We are a little bit different on average. Dika says women who want protection. You might have to give me a little bit more there, Dika. I'm not sure where you want to go with that. Yeah, give me a little more and then maybe I can talk about that. KC, the marriage thing about cows. Oh, that women feel they're being sold. Yeah, that's an interesting one too, right? Way back at the beginning of this course, we talked about the idea that humans are makers of meaning, right? We like to give meaning to things. We like things to symbolize or represent something else. And so the idea of the cows here is a very common to many cultures of the world, where people exchange things in association with a marriage, right? So sometimes the bride's family will give something to the groom's family. Sometimes the groom's family will give something to the bride's family. Sometimes they'll exchange both ways. Kind of depends on the culture you come from. Yeah, and so there's a couple of different meanings that you could have here. The most traditional meaning of this type of exchange is that a groom's family giving cows or money or something of value to the bride's family was kind of an acknowledgement of that the bride's family was losing someone from their team, right? So think back in time to a more traditional society where there's households, extended families living together, working together, maybe farming or producing food. Everybody's on the team, right? The family is working together as a team. But then a young woman in this household, she gets married, right? And so she's removed from that team and she goes to live with her husband's family, and then she becomes a part of that team, right? And she's working together in the husband's household to produce for their family. So the bride's family is kind of losing someone from their team. And so traditionally speaking, that wealth transfer, whether it's cows or money or whatever it is, was kind of saying, look, we know you're losing someone from your team and it's going to sort of economically impact your household. So here is something in compensation, right? Here is something that will help you out because we're taking a member of your team and now they're going to be on our team, right? But again, that's only one possible meaning of that practice, right? And so obviously that's not really the way things are anymore, right? People aren't living in sort of traditional extended family units where everyone's working together for one cause. That's not kind of how most societies are organized. And so the young girls in Lesotho are saying, look, I don't like this practice. I don't like this. I don't like this cultural practice anymore, because to me, the meaning, what it looks like to me, is that you're selling me, right? So young girls are ascribing a different meaning to this practice because, again, culture has changed, economies have changed, the world has changed, and yet the cultural practice remains, but it doesn't quite mean the same thing as it used to some people, particularly younger people, right? So that's that's a tricky one as well, right? And what a practice means really just depends on what people agree on, right? Something can mean whatever you want it to mean. It just depends how people see it, right? So that's a tricky one. Is it a traditional practice? Does it mean nothing, or does it actually mean something, right? What's Baha say here? Baha, yeah. So women are. We hear that women are disadvantaged, right? And so in the cultures around the world, we see that Vigdis, particularly Vigdis's mother in Iceland, she says that she encountered barriers in the workplace, right? She thought that if she went to university and she worked hard, that she would kind of rise up the ladder at work to the level of her talent, right? But what she told us was that wasn't the reality that she found, right? She found that she was held back in a number of ways, specifically because she was a woman, and she doesn't expand on that very much. Who else talks about that? I guess we could connect that comment to Shui Shui, right, where she's having the kind of sex talk with her mom, and she is, she's going to be made responsible for taking care of her sexual health, right? Because what that talk from her mother is implying is that men are not going to look after her, right? Men are not going to worry about HIV. Men are not going to worry about pregnancy. They're just going to kind of push for sexual activity, and it's going to be up to her to look out for herself, which shouldn't be the way it is. But often it is that way, right? Often boys don't get the same kind of sort of sex education and sex talk as girls do, and so girls can be kind of, I guess, feel targeted, I guess, in a way that they are constantly under pressure, and they're the ones that have to say no, right? They're the ones who have to resist this pressure. And I guess we see it in Mira's case as well, right? Mira explains that she has a lot more restrictions on what she's allowed to do and who she's allowed to be with. Although, maybe I'll add in with Mira, a couple terms ago I had a student who had lived in Jordan, and the student watched this video, the same video that you just watched, and this student felt that Mira's experience wasn't the same as hers. And so this student felt that that actually things weren't as restrictive as Mira was saying, that girls did have a lot more freedom in Jordan than Mira was leading us to believe. And so one of the things that we might think about with Mira's case too is that there probably are differences depending on families, right? Some families are a little more liberal and relaxed. Some families are more conservative. But I think you could probably say that of any culture, right? There are some families that are more relaxed, and then some families that are more conservative and rule oriented, right? Let me see, Casey. Women have some action like a man because they just want. Chan says, women have some action. You might have to give me a little bit more there, Chan. I don't know what you mean by that. Oh, okay. So women who want protection, okay, and Thika says they try men's games such as shooting to become stronger. Yeah, it was that was that was interesting with Mira, right? Because Mira was, it seems like we just heard that, she wasn't allowed to play basketball because basketball was too manly, but then she was at the shooting range shooting handguns, which I think of as kind of a manly thing to do, but maybe it's different in Jordan. I don't know. But we did see her. We did see her at the shooting range with her dad, learning how to shoot. Right. Erica says when Shui Shui's family were asked about freedom when she turns to adult, shows that women are still restricted from making their own decisions. Yeah, right. So the narrator, Ross Atkins. Ross goes to. He's in Lesotho. He goes to kind of the countryside, right, and goes to talk to Shui Shui's extended family, her great uncle, kind of thing, and they explain that that there's a traditional way of doing things, and that Shui Shui is going to be expected to, or at least advised to do those things. Again, it's a little interesting that they went to the countryside there, because what I was just talking about with Mira, sometimes you find that within a city or a country or a society, there are kind of more conservative families and there are more liberal families, right? Some families are kind of more relaxed and more kind of, they have modern values. Some families have more traditional values. And again, you see that in every society around the world, even Canada. What you also see is that people tend to be more conservative in the countryside. And so for the most part, people in cities are kind of more liberal. They're living kind of more of a modern global lifestyle. People who live in the countryside are living a more traditional lifestyle usually. And they tend to be more conservative as a result. And again, that's true of Canada as well. And you tend to see that around the world. So when we go off into the countryside in Lesotho, yeah, we probably find some more traditional values because people in the countryside tend to be that way. But yeah, we do hear that she's going to be told what's expected of her. But again, it's not entirely clear what's going on there, right? Because they say, no, well, if she doesn't know what to do, we'll tell her the right thing to do, which is kind of something that families often do anyway, right? If you go to your parents or your relatives and say, I don't know what to do about this, they will often give you advice. They'll often tell you what you should do. The question is, and I think the question for Shui Shui that's not answered for us, the question is she allowed to do what she wants? Certainly families will tell you what you should do, but does she have the freedom to do what she wants? And if she does what she wants, will her family support her and accept her, right? Or will they sort of stop talking to her, or pretend she doesn't exist, right? That's what's not. I think that's what's not answered here. And I think it's the same thing with Mira, right? When Mira's talking to her father and she asks him, what if I marry someone who is not, who you don't approve of? And he says, well, if you marry someone I don't approve of, then, that's your decision and I won't support you in it. But it's not entirely clear what that means, right? Most of our parents, if we married someone that they really didn't like, they probably wouldn't support the decision, right? They would say, I really wish you wouldn't marry this person. But what does that not support mean? Is he going to like pretend she doesn't exist and never talk to her again? Or is he going to simply say, look, I know you're going to marry this guy. I don't agree with it, but it's your decision. And yeah, you're responsible for it. It's tough to know what he means by that, right? It's kind of, to me, it's a bit of a gray area. It's a little vague what it means when he says, I wouldn't support you in that. And again, if my daughter wanted to marry some, total loser, I wouldn't support her either. But, I would still talk to her and, and help her where I could. So it's not clear what Mira's father means when he's talking about that. So I would be curious about what that not support actually means. Maybe that's all it means. Maybe he will just say, I disagree with you, but do as you will. I wanted to ask you, particularly girls, I wanted to ask you about the two British guys that they talked to. Those are the guys who were talking about porn, and then they had some comments about girls dressing up and wearing makeup and things like that. Did you have any reaction to what they were saying? And if so, what was it? What do you think, girls? Any thoughts about those guys? Karen says, "I'm shocked. I'm shocked they don't know how actual sex is." I'm not shocked, Karen. I'm not shocked. Baha says, "Somehow not satisfied because everything is clear. It could not be, and only if somehow." I don't know what that refers to, Baha. Maybe give me a clue what you're talking about, and I'll come back to that. Okay. Erica says, "I'm actually confused. Why do they relate?" Wait. Okay. This is kind of what I want to hear about. So those guys are hanging out. They're talking about watching porn. They say, it just kind of happens, right? Yeah, it just happens that you watch it. Yeah. It doesn't just happen. So they're talking about porn. They're talking to girls about it, and then they say something about wearing makeup and dressing up. I'm curious what did you think about that? There's something happening there that I want to point out, and it's connected to Shui Shui's sex talk with her mom. It's connected to that. It has to do with the makeup thing and the dressing up thing. There it is. Yeah, so those guys, so there's two comments here. So Karen, they think women put on makeup for men. And Casey says the same thing. I don't think girls like makeup for attention. Yeah, so there's something really interesting in what those guys say, right? So the narrator there, Ross Atkins, he says something like, do you think that guys should make all those, would what would you do if women said, hey, stop making all of these comments about our appearance? We don't like, we don't like you to say all that stuff. Would you stop? And the two guys say, oh yeah, we'd stop if they told us, but they obviously they want the attention because they dress up and they wear makeup, and so clearly they want us to say something. And if they didn't want us to say something, then yeah, like don't dress up and don't wear makeup, and then no one will say anything. But this is what these guys don't understand, and this is why I'm not surprised, Karen. Yeah, I don't think girls like makeup for attention. They do it for themselves and not to please others, right? But think about what those guys are saying. Those guys are saying that, if women don't want us to make uncomfortable sexual comments, then, just don't look pretty and then we won't. But again, girls aren't looking pretty just for guys, right? They're doing it for themselves, right? Girls put on nice clothes and they do their hair and their makeup, and sometimes it might be to attract attention from particular guys, but a lot of it is for themselves, right? People dress up so that they feel good and feel confident, right? It's a nice feeling to know that you are dressed nice and that you look good, right? Yeah, so that's exactly it. They think that the girls are doing it for them, right? They think it's all about them. And again, that's a very obvious dominant group thing to do, right? To think that the entire world revolves around you, and that, that's a very dominant group thing to do. And so, yeah, these guys think that the only reason that girls dress up is for the attention of guys. And if they didn't want that attention, they shouldn't dress up at all. But again, that's the same thing as Shui Shui's sex talk, right? Because Shui Shui's mom says that guys are going to pressure you for sexual behavior, and it's your job to be the gatekeeper and say no. So the responsibility for men's sexual behavior is put onto women, is put onto Shui Shui. And here it's the same thing, right? Are guys responsible for their sexist comments? Is the statement, hey guys, be more respectful of women and don't say sexist things to them? No, that's not guys' responsibility. Instead, these guys shift the responsibility to the girls and say, well, if they didn't want us to say anything, they shouldn't dress up like that, right? And so we often see that, and we see it in other types of oppression too, where the responsibility for bad behavior is shifted to the minoritized group, right? And so if the minoritized group didn't do that, then everything would be fine. But the problem is not necessarily with the minoritized group, it's with the behavior of the dominant group. And I think we could probably draw some obvious parallels to racism here, right? Where the problem isn't necessarily with the minoritized group. There are bigger problems, and the dominant group needs to look at what responsibility it has in this situation. But in the alleyway with these porn watching guys, they don't see it, right? They don't really see their behavior as bad. They don't see sort of sexist or overly sexual comments as bad. It's, obviously that's what girls want because they dress up. And if they didn't dress up so pretty, then we wouldn't say anything. But that's not how it works, right? That's not how it works. Girls dress up for their own purposes. They like to look good. Garbage truck. Girls like to look good, sometimes for themselves. Sometimes when they go out with their friends, they all want to look pretty and stylish. Sometimes they want a little bit of guy attention, but that's not the only reason that they dress up, right? I'm just going to jump to the last question here. So what is going on? What is standing in the way of women being equal to men? What's the obstacle to this? What's keeping us from achieving that equality, would you say? Okay. So Casey says society's expectations. Karen says society pressures and family members. Yeah. Casey says cultures. I think those are a pretty important part of it, and I think that's where there's more. I think, but that's where the narrator lands at the end, right? So when he's pushing his little girls on the swing and he's talking about what he's learned, one of the things he's saying is basically that inequality is kind of part of our society and culture, right? And so, and we've said that before, you can't legislate away inequality, right? You can't simply pass a law and say, you're not allowed to be sexist anymore, because those laws already exist, right? But we still have an inequality between men and women. And so you pass the law, you still have inequality, something else is going on. So it's not just about rules and laws, there's something else, right? And again, people are socialized to see themselves certain ways and socialized to see other people certain ways, and those social ideas are passed down, right? That knowledge is passed down, that culture is passed down, and they're passed down through society and through family members, right? And so we said, if we talk about social institutions, schools, parents, other family members, the media, all of those are social institutions that reproduce society as it already is, right? And so again, when your parents gave birth to you, and or your brothers and sisters, they probably raised you in a very similar way to the way they were raised, right? And they were raised in a very similar way to the way their grandparents were, right? Some changes, of course, but families tend to kind of reproduce a certain type of culture and certain expectations. And so we see that happening here, is that society has ideas about what men should be, what women should be, how each gender should act, what is acceptable for them to do and what's not acceptable for them to do. And those things get reproduced, those things get passed on. Boss says they're equal but different. Yeah, and that's a valid statement as well, right? Is that men and women are equal, but yes, they are different. And so that's again where it gets tricky, is how do you achieve equality when people are different? And you could extend that to gender, you could extend that to race, you could extend that to ability, you could extend that to religion or class. How do you create a society that is equal when you have people who are different, right? But the one who is taking a woman from service and delivering babies, he should reform himself. The one who's taking a woman. But the one who. I have no idea what that means. I think I know where you're trying to go with it, but I got confused. But it's true, right? And again, that's one of the struggles, is that we have genders that are, overwhelmingly the same, but a little bit different and different in important ways. And so how do we create a system that is equal for everybody, right? That's the tricky part. And how do we overcome our own socialization? How do we overcome the sort of ways that we've been taught to see the world, the ways that we've been taught to see men and women? How do we understand those things for what they are? Yeah. Difficult. Okay. So I'm going to end it there. That was really good. We came up with, I think, a lot of the things that we should have talked about from that documentary. There might have been a few other things, but I think we hit on kind of the major things. Tomorrow, come back. We'll sort of recap this. Then I have a very short little. It's not even an article. It's a section of a book chapter. It's like 2 pages. I have that for you to read. I have a couple questions for that, and then actually I don't know what's next. But we'll be coming to the end of this sexism thing either on Friday or on Tuesday. Okay, so we're getting ready to sort of wrap this up. Oh, I have something to do with women's right to vote. That's the other thing I have. Like the man who is marrying a woman just to serve him and deliver babies. Oh, well, again, that's the thing, is that traditionally the software that's how the software is written, right? And as time goes on, the software is rewritten, right? Because our culture changes through time. And so the original operating system gets upgraded with every generation. But some of those ideas still persist. And even though there might not be men out there who just believe, well, there probably are, but that women exist to serve them and deliver babies. Even though there might be some men who believe that, that sort of base operating system is still there, right? And so it takes us a long time to upgrade our culture and upgrade our way out of that way of thinking. Because even though most people in Canada wouldn't agree to that statement right there, there are traces of that idea still in Canadian culture and in cultures around the world. So again, it takes time to overcome those cultural ideas. You can't sort of modify them usually in a short period of time. They take a long period of time. Whew, okay, it's really hot in here this morning. Ugh, okay. That is all for today, good people. I will see you tomorrow, or I'll see you in Comparative Cultures in 10 minutes. Good work in the live chat. That was lots of interesting stuff. Have a lovely day if I don't see you in 10 minutes, and I'll see you tomorrow for Friday. Okay, so bye.